This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's the place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Well, welcome, folks. Once again, you're here at corebrainjournal.com with Dr. Charles Parker, and we have a very interesting guest today, Dr. John McGrail, and he is a PhD in clinical hypnosis, and he is going to talk to us about that innovative. It's innovative for a lot of people. Some people have no doggone idea about what hypnosis is. And John, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it is a great pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted.
So I'm going to do a little bit of intro, and then we're going to hear a little bit more about John and what hypnosis is all about, how it could fit into any kind of a recovery self-development program. So John McGrail, PhD, is a very well-known clinical hypnotherapist. He practices in Westwood, right down the street from Cedars-Sinai. He is a self-improvement expert and spiritual teacher who has helped thousands of clients and students from all walks of life. His clinical practice and self-improvement motivational seminars and workshops really make a difference out there in California. Do you actually have them virtual as well?
Oh, absolutely. I've got clients as far away as Thailand and Malaysia, Australia, Europe, but most are located on the North American continent, which with time zones makes it a little bit easier.
Yes, it does. Yeah. So Dr. McGrail has written a book, The Synthesis Effect, Your Direct Path to Personal Power and Transformation, and he introduces his uniquely effective synthesis approach there, and we're going to hear about it tonight. So it puts together science and spirit to create personal growth and transformation and achieving physical, emotional, and spiritual balance in life. So thank you very much, Dr. McGrail, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Well, as again, it's my great pleasure.
So please tell me a little bit tell our audience too, about your personal life, who you are as a person, where you are, what's going on in your life.
Well, it's really an interesting question because where I am today is so far removed from where I was not very long ago. I think, as I told you when we first met, I was the product of the Cold War, the 50s childhood. My parents were divorced when I was very young. My father was an alcoholic, drank himself to death. So you could say it was, a bit of a rough childhood. The product of that was a deeply seated lack of self-esteem and insecurity. I was one very messed up little dude, and I stayed that way for quite a long time through my college years and adult years. And people would say, well, you got to go to an Ivy League school and you graduated and you were in the service, you were an officer, an aviator, and on the surface I would look quite successful, but inside I was a pretty unhappy camper, and it was the end of a tumultuous first marriage that really sort of woke me up. I don't know, I'm sure all your listeners remember we had a pretty big earthquake out here in 1994, and that's when the earth shook for me, both literally and figuratively, because 2 days after that earthquake, my former wife decided she was going back to the East Coast and quit her job and got on a plane, and that was essentially the end of our very rocky marriage. So I really had to kind of take stock at that moment in time and decide which way my life was going to go. And I call it my rediscovery of me, but that's when my whole period of growth and transcendence started, which led eventually to me doing what I do today.
So, and how did you actually begin that process then? As soon as you say that, I'm with you in your pain there. So then what was that next thing you did to say, okay, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? What was that next thing you did?
Well, interesting. It was both painful and incredibly liberating. I think a lot of people say, well, what am I going to do to get out of this situation? And for me, Mother Nature had a big hand in it. It would have happened anyway. It was just a question of time. Things were pretty unraveled. But believe it or not, someone gave me a book, and it was a novel, and I'm sure a lot of listeners remember this. It was called The Celestine Prophecy. Mm-hmm. And it was very spiritually oriented, and I just read the book because I had not much else to do at the time. And something in the message of that book just hit me viscerally. And I think what happened, the short of it, was that I finally accepted the concept of spirituality, not religion, but spirituality, and this whole concept of being more than just the physical body with a mind. And I started really studying, and as we talk, and you'll see, I'm very much about how energy is manifested. And I began to become very interested in the native philosophies, the Aboriginal philosophies of the world, particularly Native Americans, because they're right here and it's so easy to get to, but also the Australian Aborigines and some of the South American tribes. And the more I studied, the more I felt at home, and the more I began to get a sense of how powerful I could be. And it really changed everything about the way I viewed my life. I got rid of my insecurities. I rediscovered self-esteem. I started making different choices. I stopped caring what other people thought of me or expected of me. And that whole, it was sort of like, I liken it to going down from the wide end of a funnel where you're not really sure what's going on. And by the time I got out the other end, I was a very, very happy individual. And that practice, again, eventually, it took some years of study and fate, kismet, whatever you want to call it, led me to going back to school to get my original certification as a hypnotherapist, and then on to the PhD. And of course, I've been in practice now for about 16 years.
So why was it, a lot of people might take that experience and where you were, the transformational moment, and say, okay, they're going to study psychology. What led you to hypnotherapy and that particular avocation?
Excellent question, and a very simple and practical answer. When this happened, I was 42, 43 years old, and when I finally decided to go to school, it was because I had been laid off from a very lucrative job in media. I was at another crossroads about when was it? About 5 years after 94. I was remarried to a beautiful woman who I just celebrated my 20th anniversary with, and we're as in love today as we were when we met. But I was married, I had a mortgage, and I was not able to say, okay, I can devote the next 8 or 10 years of my life to getting a PhD in psychology, which was my first thought. I also thought of divinity school, and I looked at a variety of avocations, and then it wasn't terribly ironic that I saw an ad for a hypnotherapy college in LA, which was the only federally accredited college of hypnotherapy at the time. There may be one or two others now. But in my process of rediscovering me, that growth period, worked with a brilliant gal who was a hypnotherapist. So I really learned firsthand how powerful the practice of hypnotherapy can be. And I was always interested in the mind-body dynamic. So that, combined with the fact that it was only a year and not 10, that I could actually get into practice and start helping people and make money again, which was sort of necessary, along with my natural interests and proclivities, led me down that path. And as I like to say to people, I have not worked since. I have not worked a day.
I feel like I'm not working now, so I'm with you on that, brother.
Exactly. This is part of what I do, and the fact that we can share this information with people and helping people in the clinical practice, doing workshops and seminars, and to see the light bulb go off, to see and to help, because I do believe it's a facilitation. And, we're not healers, we are facilitators. Or as my favorite Native American shaman, Frank Foolscrow, said, we are a hollow bones through which the energy of healing and transformation flows. But that isn't work. It's a joy to watch the light bulb go off and to have someone say, wow, life can be fun. That's rule number one in my methodology. Life is supposed to be fun, and it can be.
So now you're stimulating some more interesting questions that I'm interested in. I don't know if it's an interesting question or not yet. We'll see. But the bottom line is, I'm wondering about whether, hypnosis can have a certain active element of making a person do something. It can have a very passive, and it can be really the hypnotist taking a ride with the person along a guided imagery trail. So,
yes.
So tell me where you fit in all that, and help our listeners understand why you fit in there.
Well, quite frankly, I fit in all of those modalities. The hypnosis is nothing more than a state of consciousness. It is grossly misunderstood. and mystified, but it is a natural state of consciousness that every normal human brain enters several times every day. Some very classic, specific examples. Daydreaming is a form of hypnosis. Watching a good film or television show and getting hooked into it, everything disappears. You're responding to the suggestions of the film. You're feeling real feelings and emotions. That is a state of hypnosis. As I mentioned, daydreaming, reading a good book and getting totally absorbed in it. All of these are naturally hypnotic moments. Now, since it's a natural state of consciousness, it can be induced very easily if someone allows it to happen. You have to allow it. You can't force it. And you can't control anybody. So while, yes, you're completely correct, there is relaxed hypnosis or relaxation hypnosis, which is a very passive state, usually associated with a lot of imagery, because that's the language of our subconscious mind. We think in images. That's what imagination is. There's active hypnosis, where we enter that state of consciousness with a specific purpose. For instance, to induce anesthesia or analgesia. To numb pain. And I do a lot of work in the medical area, pre-op, post-op, pain management, people with lower back pain, cancer patients, helping them cope with the side effects of radiation and chemotherapy. It's just literally tapping into the ability of the human mind to control itself. And so I use all varieties of hypnosis, and I've been doing this long enough now, and I've studied it enough to know a variety of techniques to induce any one of those three variations of what is already a natural state of consciousness.
Well, then help me with this, because I've had some experience with guided imagery. Help separate that for me from what you're doing, or help put it together in a package that I can understand, please. Well,
I would say that guided imagery is part, and it's a great accompaniment to hypnosis. You can do guided imagery in a perfectly alert, what we might call just relaxed state of mind, or you can take that relaxed state of mind, increase the focus, increase physical relaxation, and actually shift the activity of the brain. And that creates a very open, receptive state of mind. I often call it a childlike state of mind, because in theory, the subconscious mind is very much like a child. It never gets past about 3 years old. It can't tell the difference between good or bad, happy or sad, pain or pleasure. All it knows, its base 2, like a computer, is positive inputs or negative inputs. And so you can tell a 3-year-old 2 plus 2 is 5, and he or she will believe you. And if you reinforce it enough, that becomes their truth. Or you can tell them 2 plus 2 is 4, and he or she will believe you. So if you establish that deeper state, that shifted consciousness, if you will, which is very similar to meditation, it's an alpha state. You can even take it deeper into delta. If they go to theta, they're asleep, you got to wake them up, and I have that happen all the time late in the afternoon. People come after work, they're tired, my chair is very comfortable, and off they go, and I have to bring them back up, because deep hypnosis would be considered right before actual sleep. But in that state, there seems to be both a heightened awareness and a greater amount of what we call suggestibility or receptivity, and therefore the images can be very much more powerful in their effect, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. And so then the issue is, from my guided imagery experience, sorry to wear this out, but
Oh, not at all.
I think it's it's educational for me, and I appreciate your helping me with this. The guided imagery, you'd take a person down a path that they may wish to go, get rid of fear, get rid of pain, see somebody that they didn't say goodbye to who died yesterday. Those kinds of things where they actually have a kind of reproduction of a real situation in an imagery, in a way of imagery and improved self-management. Now, go ahead, please.
No, absolutely. It would be called revivification, where they actually relive an experience. And because the subconscious mind does not have the subjective ability to differentiate between present, future, all it understands, past and future, all it understands is present time. Psychologically or subconsciously, it becomes a very real experience. And the truth of the matter is, take past life regression, which is a fascinating subject and something that I do work with. We certainly would have a hard time proving that past lives existed. And when a client comes in, I have never had anybody turn into Cleopatra or Napoleon or they're just normal people in a different time. But very often they believe And that's really all that counts. And they expect that this experience is going to have an effect. And what happens is that we get a therapeutic result. Now, whether or not that person lived 500 years ago and was kidnapped and abandoned or drowned is irrelevant to me. When I see that person leave with that cathartic effect, that's all I care about. So, again, to give you a simple answer to what is a very complex question, it's simply a state of consciousness that seems to increase our receptivity, our suggestibility, and the believability of our child within the subconscious mind.
Okay, so we got from a very general, large, 25,000 feet, large picture. Let's go down to an example of what might happen where a person, we wouldn't need to necessarily do age regression, but give us an example of a person that you might see who has a problem, and then what you would do with that person and how you would reconstruct something for them through hypnotherapy.
Well, one of the most typical cases I see nowadays, and this has changed dramatically over the years, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I was fairly new at this, I would probably see 50% of the folks that would come in would have a habit like smoking cessation, or they'd want to lose weight, or stop biting their nails. Today, 85% of the people I see are chronically stressed and anxious. Anxiety is, I think, epidemic in our culture. And I believe that it is largely culturally induced for a lot of reasons. But typically, a person that comes in with just sort of general low-level or sometimes even more acute anxiety has this dread, this constant feeling of dread. There's no real threat. There's nothing wrong. Everything is going well in their lives, but they're miserable, and sometimes to the extent where they can't leave their homes, which is tragic. And very rarely do I see a pure agoraphobic. But what we would do in that sense is through a series of sessions, first allow them to get the sense of the fact that they can control their mind, because I can usually make the anxiety go away in a few minutes. I have a couple of techniques that I've used, that I've developed, that literally you can see the shift in their energy, and it's very, very simple. But we sort of block their active thoughts of dread, and when the mind stops, the dread has to go away, and pretty soon they realize, hey, maybe I can control my mind. And then through a series of sessions where we would use what we would call guided imagery, progressive desensitization to whatever it is that's causing the anxiety. If it's specific, like it could be airplanes, it could be driving on the freeway, it's amazing where it ends up sometimes. Usually within a few weeks, the person not only feels in control, but they're functioning quite well. And I see this over and over and over and over again. It's almost become a specialty that I fell into only because so many people came or are coming in with that condition.
So that would be an anxiety condition. And, as you're talking, I'm a recovering psychoanalyst. So, I spent many years chasing that understanding. It was very interesting. And of course, as soon as you said there is no time in the unconscious, that was a Freudian remark. Freud started with that concept. It isn't Freudian now, but that's really what happened. He did recognize it. And you think about psychoanalysis as a method of hypnosis, because that person enters an altered state in the free association, and they go in different places that may or may not be real.
Right.
So, but the thing I'm driving at is the next thing I wonder what your opinion is. Have you done any work with individuals who are concerned that they've been, for example, sexually abused? Because then there's a whole thing of whether in fact they have been sexually abused, whether they haven't, and what happens with that. Do you do some work with that as well?
I do, and I get quite a few calls every year from people who believe that something happened, or there's a block of time that's missing, and they want to go back and uncover whatever those memories are. And the first thing that I always do is gently remind them that if something's repressed, it's often for a very good reason, and that in the uncovering of it, we could create more harm than good. Depending on the person and the situation, I might also require a referral from a licensed psychotherapist or psychiatrist, because I'm not licensed to practice medicine or diagnose. So it's a very fine line between the worried well, which is the scope of a hypnotherapist or self-help expert, and then a disorder that could be diagnosable and found in the DSM. So I'm always skirting that balance, and I've become really good at knowing when it's time to get another opinion and a referral. But the truth of the matter is, very often I've been successful in allowing them to, if you will, let it lie, because it will do no good to dig it up. If it happened, it happened, and here you are. And if it didn't happen, here you are. So let's work on empowering you now and helping you desensitize yourself from what you think is traumatizing you, so that you can go out and have a relationship, and you can trust men or women or whatever the case may be, and not be hanging on to something that is long done, often may not have happened, and really ought not to have any effect upon you. So that's where I would focus that most of the time.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Because really, I don't do psychotherapy anymore because we're so biologically oriented and been so involved with doing the medications right and getting the biology squared away. But, so often what happens, that's exactly the way to do it. Here we are right now. What can we do about it? And really, in a way, to use a colloquialism, deprogram them in some way from what their belief system is.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Tell us more about your book and the concept of the synthesis approach, if you will. That sounds very interesting.
Sure. Well, the book is the stepchild of my doctoral paper. When it came time to write a dissertation, as I mentioned to you, I've always been interested in the mind-body connection. I was playing with hypnosis 30 years ago when I was still in the military, just because I found it so fascinating. And when I got interested in native Aboriginal philosophy, which is very spiritual in its nature. And again, the cultural semantics between the tribal cultures of the world, the indigenous peoples of the world, they're vastly different. They have different ceremonies and whatnot. But if you dig just below that surface of the cultural semantics, you get a very, very similar ethos in these peoples. And in the day, they were separated by huge geographies and yet had very similar worldviews and philosophical views. And that intrigued me. So the synthesis effect came about because as I got more and more competent and confident practicing hypnosis, I started incorporating more meditative and spiritual exercises into the work. So we were doing, what we would call scientifically formal hypnotherapy, which is, somewhat formulaic, I suppose, although there is an art to it, which I find is the most interesting part of it. But I started incorporating these more spiritual exercises into the hypnotherapy. And what I found, to my delight, was that people got better faster. And when I was trying to figure out what to write, here I am sitting there saying, no, what do I have to add to human behavior? I mean, this has been me, little pissant me. What original work can I possibly offer? And then it dawned on me that I had 1,000 or more case files in my cabinet. And I said, let me see if I could just go through and see something. Here was the aha moment. What's the difference between clients that do really well really quickly, those that do okay, and those few, fortunately, because I still have a business, that don't get it, that I can't help? I went through 1,000+ cases to see if I could find the differences or any common denominators. And I used completion rate as sort of my benchmark. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, it didn't take very long to see a pattern. There were certain conscious energies that successful clients brought to the party: desire, commitment, and a sense of expectation, which is huge in this work. Mm-hmm. And the more I did it, the more I realized that the other thing that was a significant factor were those people who accepted and embraced their spirituality and started doing a regular, consistent meditative practice along with the hypnotherapy sessions. And it was so clear cut, there was like a 50% difference in completion rate. Wow. And that was the basis of synthesis, because then I started studying some of the latest science on energy and quantum mechanics and what we are discovering about the nature of what may be the nature of the mind and energy, and then you get into the whole thing, the whole cosmic thing with the infinite intelligence that underlies all things, and it all sort of coalesced into this process called synthesis, where we take conscious, logical, cognitive thinking, what we would call Western thinking, and we bring it together with these more ancient techniques, traditions, and methods in synthesis to create a stronger whole. And that's essentially what the synthesis effect is.
Very interesting. That is terribly interesting. So give us one example, because now you have everybody's curiosity up about that Aboriginal tweak. An example, if you don't mind, how that might be applied, if you don't mind.
Well, if you just look at the differences between the way Western thinkers think and the way indigenous peoples that have not yet been exposed to Western thinking, we're very much a culture of consumerism, and we consume the natural resources of the planet, and it's all about control. And we have a very basic ethos. I'll believe it when I see it, because that's the essence of science. Prove it. And of course, to a great extent, that's been incredibly valuable. But if you take that with our incessant desire to control not only in our environment, but ultimately nature, which is sort of where we're going, it gets very, very dicey at a certain level. Then you take the Aboriginal thinking, and again, whether it's Native Americans or Australians, it doesn't matter where they are. The Aboriginal indigenous thinking is, hey, wait a second, I am just part of a bigger whole, and if I live in balance with myself and my fellows and the world, the universe, energetically, I can believe in order to see rather than having to see in order to believe. Completely opposite mind views. But you can bring them together, and that's what I do over and over and over again. And if you do it in the right way, it doesn't take very long to create a perpetual motion machine, seeing to, or believing to see, to believe, to see, to believe, to see, to believe, to see. And of course, we are nothing but a product of our beliefs.
Very interesting. Now, I am going to hold your feet to the fire a little bit here, John, because I think it's great. I just love that phrase. I love the way you're talking about it. It's very, very interesting. But give me an example of a way that you might actually do that with a person who is stuck, because that's what we're dealing with every day as stuck people. I mean,
sure,
we get stuck, you get stuck, I get stuck, we all get stuck. And when a person comes to you, they are arrested somewhere in this Western thought, because they are at a level of, that's their level of thinking. So then when you say Aboriginal, my mind goes to Australian Aborigines. And so then and I know nothing about them, so I'm not coming from any point of knowledge whatsoever. But I'm curious. Then the issue is, what would be a technique that might take a person down to a belief rather than a thought? What would be a way you might do that?
Well, it really depends on the person and where they are, but I would say that most people, as I mentioned, are stuck in that sort of Western thought pattern. And so, for instance, I worked with a lovely woman today who was brought up to believe that she was unworthy and inferior, and her parents spent their entire lives basically cutting her down. So she has virtually no self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And because she has virtually no self-esteem, when something happened to her in her marriage, she blamed herself. And of course, it had nothing whatsoever to do with her. Mm-hmm. And so I normally start with the Western model. And again, I'll just use this person because literally 3 hours ago she was here, and I would say something, I'd ask a question like, okay, you have this belief that has become your reality, because what you believe defines your truth, and what you perceive as true defines your reality. You perceive and believe that you are less than and unworthy. Can you please give me some substantiated facts that would prove it so I can believe it? Show me.
Oh, gotcha.
Show me the empirical evidence to suggest that you are unlovable or unworthy or don't deserve to be happy, and of course, they can't.
You're approaching from a Western world. Okay.
I always start that because that's what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with Western thinking.
Yeah.
And so then I'll say, okay, well, let's use Western thinking. If you cannot prove it, then I cannot believe it. And it must not be true. If that's not true, then what must be true? And we just go to the contrapositive. Well, the contrapositive must be that you are worthy and you are lovable and you do deserve abundance. Now let's see where it went sideways. And so then we go back to early childhood, which is where all this stuff happens. Of course, that's when we're programmed, when we spend more time in what we would call hypnosis than consciousness, where we are basically suggestible all the time. And I will illustrate how the subconscious mind learned through input, association, identification, and reinforcement to believe these, what I call earth flat beliefs. And I'll also say, take a look at any little kid that has not yet been subjected to that. They're perfectly happy. They know they're perfect little beings. They're full of absolute unconditional love, and they don't care what anybody thinks of them. They're full of self-esteem. That's how you were. Now, if you were in a native culture, you would have been educated to develop yourself from the beginning. They don't ever inculcate their kids with, you're not good enough, you are part of this magnificent whole, you are a spiritual being, part of the Creator. And that's how they're raised. And if you nurture that energy, you will be a very productive member of the tribe, which is what we want. And so we just then go back and start teaching them how to think that way.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
And it's amazing. It doesn't take very long. It's, we can get rid of years and years and years of dysfunction in literally a matter of weeks with some, not everybody, of course, some people need more time than others, but for most folks, if they come in with the right ingredients or the right conscious energies, which is desire, commitment, willingness to do the work, and we work on this feeling of self-love, honor, and respect, add a little intention and expectation, and amazing things start to happen.
Well, John, do you then give them post-hypnotic suggestions?
Oh, yes.
Okay, how does that work? Because I'm curious, and I know listeners would like to hear about that as well.
Well, again, when we allow ourselves to enter hypnosis, and I must underline the fact that we cannot make anybody, we can't force anybody into hypnosis, and we cannot control anybody's mind. We cannot make suggestions that would be antithetical to their values, morals, or beliefs. If that were to happen, they instantly come out of trance. You can't make anybody do anything they don't want to do, so it's really important that they want it. But once we're in that very suggestible, receptive state of mind, a post-hypnotic suggestion it can be very simple. And again, it depends on the person and their receptivity. Different people respond to different types of suggestions. Some people you would give a very direct suggestion to. In about 2 days, you're going to start feeling really, really good. You're not going to know why. Don't worry about it, but just remember when that good feeling starts to happen in about 2 days, or so, maybe more, maybe less, because the subconscious mind is a tricky thing. Just remember that I told you it's the beginning of change. Now, that would be a very direct suggestion. An indirect suggestion might be, depending on, again, on the person, and we can test for this, their suggestibility. You might say that, you suddenly find yourself feeling very, very comfortable and smiling for no reason whatsoever. Enjoy that. That's a sign that your mind has started to make the changes. So they infer that that's going to happen. Either way, and I often combine it with what we call a double bind. After it's over, I'll say, now listen, when you call me in 2 or 3 days to let me know you're feeling great, I'm going to ask you, was it the hypnosis, or was it that stuff that we did in the beginning when we were just talking and I was showing you how to breathe slowly and deeply? I'm going to know which it is. So please be prepared to answer that question. When you call me in about 2 days feeling great, okay? And in that state of mind, in hypnosis, you go, okay. You can the head nods, and they have a big smile on their face, and I know it's coming.
Very interesting. So then, what you do is you actually set, by them having a post-hypnotic suggestion, it sets a different reality for them, a different perception of the world, and it empowers them on a deeper level to say, I am in control of myself, and this was something I did. I did this myself.
Right. Well, one of the tenets behind my whole synthesis philosophy is that we do, in fact, create our own reality, and there's an enormous amount of scientific evidence that suggests that we do, because our thoughts are energy. Energy is energy is energy. It's got to go someplace. It's got to flow. And I'm sure you may or may not be familiar with some of the experimentation that's being done today, but the power of thought on the environment is significant. And so how you focus your thoughts, the choices you make, have a huge effect on what you attract. fact. And a lot of people think that's, woo-woo and nonsense, but quantum physics is very quickly catching up to that notion that we do, in fact, through our energetic interactions, manifest our reality. It feels like life is happening to us, but in fact, that's not the case. So since you're creating your own reality, why not learn to create one that you like, rather than the one you thought you were stuck with?
Very, very interesting. So I know a lot of our listeners, certainly myself, what would you say would be, that time went by so fast. I mean,
it did.
We're like Zoom, that went by. So we're at a time we really need to close a little bit. What would you say would be a takeaway that you would say to listeners about their evolution in this regard? We have a book, which, your book is going to be a drawing at corebrainjournal.com/038 drawing. Thank you very much. And you're going to have a PDF with that. So we're really excited about giving that away, and people can sign up for that, and we'll have a giveaway there on the show notes. But what would you say would be a thought in closing? And it's hard to be specific, but in a general way, what would be a thing you might say to the audience about something they could do in the next couple of days that might be helpful?
Well, the first thing I would say is that whether or not we know it, nothing happens in our life that does not get processed by our mind. Nothing happens in the body. And, as you're well aware, the allopathic model of medicine is now more slowly than I'd like to see incorporating the concept of the mind-body dynamic, because people get better faster and stay well instead of getting ill. So this thing called our mind is an incredibly powerful instrument that you can learn to use to manifest whatever it is you want. Mm-hmm. Something that would be a very practical, easy exercise, even if you just have a little extra stress or whatnot. And this is an exercise I outline in the book as well. But take the time, and I would ask everybody to commit 21 days to sitting once a day, turning off the phone, turning off the computer, sitting in a quiet space. Just simply close your eyes and take 21 slow, deep breaths, counting down from 21 to 0. If you lose count, you have to start over. It's going to take some practice for most of us. I can promise you it's not as easy as it sounds. And after you get through 21 breaths in a row, nice and slow and gentle and deep, with your eyes closed and your body sitting in a very relaxed state, you will be in a very light state of hypnosis, or perhaps even a deep state. You might have even fallen asleep. Doesn't matter. If you fall asleep, when you wake up, you can do it again. And then simply visualize yourself the way you would want to be. So if you're extra stressed, visualize yourself relaxed, feeling in control, and letting the vagaries of life roll off your back like water off a duck. If you're feeling anxious, see yourself in that situation feeling absolutely good. Do that every day for 21 days and be very specific about what it is you're imagining you want. And call me after 21 days and thank me.
Can we send you an email?
Absolutely. But it's a very powerful way to start learning how to leverage the power of the mind, the power of thought, the power of expectation, the power of belief into creating an energy which will then manifest into a physical reality.
It's amazing. I'm trying to think of the person that, and unfortunately it's not coming to me right now, but the person who wrote the book about the imagining yourself in the future, and he's out in California. Sorry, I can't come up with it right now. I'll put it in the show notes, because I do.
Great.
But there's another guy who's written a book like that. But back to it. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I mean, I think doing that little process, it does become a reality. I've done it myself, to tell you the truth. I did it. I was doing Zen meditation for years, did martial arts, and I didn't know how your situation differed, but I did Zen meditation, and got myself into a state and was breathing and imagining myself doing a presentation where I really wanted to go. I really wanted to go to Seattle, and at that time I was talking a lot. I'd written a book called Deep Recovery: How to Use Your Most Difficult Relationships to Find Out Who You Are. Mm-hmm. And I wrote that book, and I wanted to take it out there and go to the West Coast, and I really wanted to go trout fishing in Washington. And I said, okay, I'm just going to do that. I kept doing it. I got a call from the Northwest Conference on Addictions. And who would have ever, and brought out, and it had a great day fishing out on the Yakima River in Washington. And I know it had something to do with imagining getting off the plane, being there, doing the presentation to a packed house. And I don't do that every day, but I think it's something that, has some credibility, and want to share that with you.
Well, we would call that synchronicity, and it's not at all surprising to me. By the way, I don't know if the audience can know that you and I can see one another because of this miraculous thing called technology. That's a beautiful brown trout you got on the wall back there.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm going to be up there in about a week doing that very thing myself.
Oh, where are you going?
We're going to Oregon and Washington on a vacation. My wife and I are taking a road trip, so we're going to pack our fishing rods and camping gear and just bum around for a couple of weeks.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun.
Yes.
Do you fish with nymphs, or do you fish on the top? What do you do?
Well, we match the hatch. We'll see what's going on and what's working, and we're not purists by any stretch of the imagination.
Nor
I like to have trout for dinner. So if a worm works, I'll use a worm.
Sounds like fun. John, thank you so much. Dr. John McGrail, thank you so much. It's been very interesting. And we're going to have your book there, The Synthesis Effect. Where can they reach you if they'd like to give you a call or get in contact with you?
Well, thank you first again for having me on. It's been a delight, and if you ever want to revisit any of this and go deeper, I would be delighted to come back. But thanks for that invitation to share my. I'm reachable at either of my websites, drjohnmcgrail.com, which is pretty simple, my name, drjohnmcgrail.com, or Hypnotherapy Los Angeles, all one word, again long, but you can't forget it, hypnotherapylosangeles.com. And from my websites, I can be reached via email or phone. And I do always respond in person to any inquiries. I do a lot of these shows, and I get a lot of emails and even phone calls, and I'm always happy to respond in person. I don't have my people do it because I don't have any people.
Thank you so much, John. Very well said. Nothing like a little bit of authenticity to sign off,
There you go. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.